I wrote this book because I want my enemies to come out. The Zondo Commission for me was probably, and not Zondo, I'm talking about the system. That entire commission was probably the biggest, most shameful scam, political scam. Something that was supposed to delve into the truth about how states are captured was turned into a sham of scapegoating. You know, white lawyers now represent 3 people who are accused of feeding 2 black women to the pigs. Ask any South African if they know their names. They don't.
The Zuma contempt moment, talk us through that, because again, this is a key moment in our political history where a former president effectively says, I'm not going to appear. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. Today we invite SMWX royalty back onto this channel, one of your favorite guests, but we have a special episode because we are talking about this seminal and important book, Odyssey of Liberation, a memoir of a rebel advocate by Advocate Muzi Sikhakhane. Advocate Kekana, thank you very much for joining us on SMWX.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I suppose we can start with what motivated you to write this book.
Yeah, man. It's a difficult question because I don't know. I think it's watching the country, the profession, and things that have changed and things that have not changed. And I thought, let me throw in my story. Because there's a lot of misunderstanding about my views, which I think is not a misunderstanding just about my views and what I stand for. It's a misunderstanding of the plight of people who are African and why they complain. So I thought, let me put it out there because some of the responses to my, let's call it radical views, are misinformed about what inspires them. So I thought, let me put it down and see even if it's my last fight.
It's a brave move because while reading the book you realize how few people in your position have actually told their stories, both from the perspective of political activism but also being an advocate at the highest level of the profession, a black advocate, and the specific pressures that come with being in that position, particularly when you represent clients who are in the public eye.
I thought, there was a familiarity in that experience, a familiarity with what I've always experienced in South Africa for the black experience. And so I thought, actually, I'm not experiencing this for the first time. It's my experience with whiteness, with white power, and probably the experience of every black person who's scared to speak out about it. And I found that there's a consistency of this difficulty that a black person faces, either must comply, conform, or die. Right? Because if you don't conform, you die, even if it's not a physical death. A lot of us are dead spiritually because we're scared of differing with the holders of not public power. It's just a power because it exists in private hands as well. So a lot of people are scared to speak out because I was telling someone who was driving here that telling the truth does not pay the bills. And so many people really fear telling the truth about how they feel in case they starve.
So much is known about you. We've seen you on our TV screens representing clients at the highest level of the law. But this book really delves into your life story. And it starts right at the beginning. Talk to us about your upbringing and some of the important moments that led you down the path.
I wanted to be a priest, so and then I became a teacher, and then became an advocate, right? But I think in it, the experience, I don't think what I write about is my experience, and that is why I don't want this book to be seen as Muzi Sikhakhane, the hero in a movie, right? It's actually Muzi Sikhakhane, a replica of black experience. That if you look at all of us who are black, we've been experiencing probably the same thing. Since I was 10, I've been watching the white farmer where I grew up being powerful, right? The white priest being powerful. white people, 8 in number and hundreds of us queuing alone and served first. And it's been a repeat of that kind of childhood experience at different phases of my life. And I thought, because a lot of people misunderstand why I am impatient about injustice, is that it's a repetition of what I've seen and experienced. And it's a lived experience of every African person all over the world. And then I thought, let me write about it, because some people think I'm just petulant, right? Things are fine, because no one wants to look at life from the experience of a black person. Not even black people want to see life from the experience of a black person, because it's difficult. So what they do is to get out of their skin, become somebody else in order to be accommodated by the powerful. So I thought, let me trace my ideas so that someone who thinks I just emerge as a petulant advocate who's probably emotional and intolerant, it's actually my experience since I was a child. So my upbringing is that of that difficulty, watching communities that are probably the poorest battle, and that builds that tenacity in you. It either beats you to submit, and I think 90% of African people submit. But there are those of us who don't. You question, you fight it. And I wanted to tell my story so that those who misunderstand me, and when I say in the book, says, what has happened to Muzi? It's people who don't know me. Yeah. I've always been like this, right? I've always been like this when I was 10, when I was 15. So it's not new. But people who see you for the first time, they think you probably just, what's the word? Stubborn, contrarian. You just want to be different, they think. They don't actually know that some of us have been watching this lived reality and have experienced it. And as a result, I'm very impatient with white power, because it's been my experience since I was a child. And so I can't tolerate it to the extent that it becomes oppressive to anybody. I just can't tolerate it. I can't tolerate injustice. And I write there in this book for people to trace, where does this intolerance come from? I'm not a Johnny come lately in the struggle. I'm not just angry like most people who say now they were fighting in the struggle when they were not. I've been fighting this battle since childhood, and I haven't won it.
When you read the book, and I'm sure as people learn about your story and how it bears on our political history, I'm struck by this sense I always get when I have the joy to speak to people like you of your eminence, who I just don't think we as a country have appreciated how much people like you had to overcome. I don't even know if you have appreciated it.
People tell me.
To transcend the bonds of poverty, rise somehow. I don't even know how you would get to university, but then excel and in one generation go from one place to a completely different place in your own lifetime. And then when I see people criticize people like you, I'm like, what gives you the right to have any view on the moral choices of someone who has had a life that you simply could never even comprehend? How much they've gone through 100 times the struggle you've gone through, and yet you think you have the authority to pontificate on their choices.
I think, sometimes I see a lot of things. I'm not on Twitter, I've never been, but I see a lot of things people send me. Much of the criticism that you get against people like myself and others, it's not, I don't take it as criticism. It's what I call moral justifications for apathy. People don't want to be cowards, even though they are. people don't want to be on the wrong side, even if they are. People, their consciences tell them that they are wrong, but they need to live with themselves. So what do? They turn that around and so find fault in those who are braver than they are, because they want to live with themselves. And I understand it. It's a psychological game of survival, is that people don't want someone who does what they don't do or what they should be doing. And so what do is to sort of find condemnation of those that are braver than them. Just like most people find to condemn a guy who's fitter than them, right? It's a psychological way of coping with your apathy, your cowardice, and doing nothing. And I think it's, power is a very dangerous thing, because it kills generations, it degrades, it shames, and it turns people to comply, and it turns people against who they are. And usually when you see that, it's people who can't cope with people who are questioning them. But second, it's people who've been beaten so much from generation to generation that they've accepted their inferior place under the sun.
This book is so interesting because one realizes how many times you've come close to death and how many times you've stared it in the face. And you actually speak about how at a certain point in your activism, you almost hankered after martyrdom. That's how much you mean
that ambition. I think your dad will tell you, anyone of my age, apartheid was such that there was no other ambition you could have, except maybe those who wanted to comply. You can be a teacher, a nurse, and all of that, right? So ambitions were, so those of us who were different, who wanted to fight what we saw, well, you're so immersed in that battle, not because you want any reward, right? And so at some point in my teens, I would like to die fighting. I would like to die doing what I think is right.
Wow.
And once you in that realm, some people told me, a colleague told me, but they will challenge you about this. You could lose your career. Wow. I would be so glad to be kicked out by a racist establishment because it would show them up.
Absolutely.
It would prove the point I'm making. In fact, I'm waiting for them. I wrote this book because I want my enemies to come out so that the public can see the pretensions of the system,
Absolutely.
the pretensions of people who say they are progressive and liberal, when actually they are fascist in character. And so I'm waiting for them. I actually wrote it because I want to see for myself, but to shine this light on the bigots, the pretenders, the people who smile and say they are progressive when they are not, because they're going to come out and I'm going to deal with them one by one. Intellectually, if they challenge me, I hope they don't challenge me physically. But if they do, I've survived many physical attempts. I just am not a violent person, but I'm a very violent defender of myself. So it's both at the intellectual level and physical level that I put this up and say, let me wait and see. Let me show up people who are enemies of liberation and genuine progress of people. I may be a sacrificial lamb in the process, but I've always wanted to be.
And for those who don't have a sense, I mean, there's a scene in the book from your early life where there's a point at which there's a huge group of people who are actually basically coming to kill you, basically. And you somehow miraculously, through, I think it's hiding in a drum, if I'm not mistaken, apart from many other, got your way out of that. So you have had to physically defend your life, even from an early age.
Many times. I mean, I think I told you in the mini launch we had.
Yeah.
Like, some stories would not make sense, right? And the reason you don't tell them is because it looks like a movie. But I've had many brushes with death. And actually, I'm not scared of it, right? So in a way, when people think I'm stubborn, right, they actually don't realize, because I have a friendly demeanor, but what they don't realize is I've had so many brushes with death that nothing really phases me, right? The only thing that phases me is if I think morally I'm on the wrong side or I'm keeping quiet in order to get reward. And I think for me, I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I did that. I mean, it's the saying that it's better to die standing than to live on your knees all the time. And I think most of us, most people, live on their knees. I know meetings already of people discussing these books. How dare does it do this? Right? Because they live to impress those from whom they seek validation. And that's the life I'm trying to show young people of your generation. My generation is a lost cause, but your generation, to realize that there is no need to live on your knees. You can challenge the system. In fact, I brought something here to read for you about dissent.
Great.
That Pius Langa says to us. Both Pius and Bram Fischer says this to us. In fact, Bram Fischer says this. And by the way, the establishment kicked him out.
Absolutely, yeah.
And pretended to be reinstating him last year or whatever year. But they haven't changed. And he says, when an advocate does what I have done, his conduct is not determined by any disrespect for the law, nor because he hopes to benefit personally by any offense he may commit. On the contrary, it requires an act of will to overcome his deeply rooted respect of legality. And he takes the step only when he feels that, whatever the consequences to himself, his political conscience no longer permits him to do otherwise. He does it not out of a desire to be immoral, but because to act otherwise would, for him, be immoral. And that's what I'm sending out in this book.
Before the law, you were an educator. There was a time when another very famous guest of this show, Aubrey Machikli, and you were actually teaching at a similar time. Talk us through that important moment in our country's history and also how it figured into your life, given that there were teachers at the time who were conscientizing a new generation of students.
You know, there were few of us at the time who could see that there was something wrong with the education system, right? And of course, it was the 80s were a difficult time. I had just emerged from being a student leader in 1984, 85, 86. And you go into the schooling system that's fragmented. Fragmented because, you know, white power has always, as it does today, fragmented those that it oppresses. And so there were homeland system, and I mean in Natal, as it was then, there were something called central government schools and KwaZulu schools. So you go into the schools to confront children who, in my view, are being politically groomed to be compliant. Politically groomed to embrace their inferiority. Sometimes religiously groomed to accept that the place of a black child is inferior. So you have to counter that. And I talk about that in the book, that the first thing I did was to put a picture of a black Jesus of Bigo on the walls, right? You want to see what the children think of themselves, right? And of course, there was no white person there, but the black principal himself was scared. He liked me a lot, but he was scared that you could put Bigo on the wall. But I was smart enough to put Shaga on the wall as well, right? And all of those. But because it's those teachings that have destroyed generations of our children, of all of us, to think we are inferior. It's because everything we open our eyes into when we are born is a black person being subservient to white power. I'm called Frederick. That's my other name, by the way. And I was baptized at the doorstep of a church because my parents were told a child called Muzi, my name is Mzavu, won't go to heaven. Now, you must think what that does when the entire population is told that your name, which is African, will not take you to heaven. It's absolute rubbish, but a lot of people believed it. So Aubrey and I met because I had discovered that I couldn't teach in government schools. I had been attacked and I was leaving the country and I stayed in Joburg. And I had met Aubrey, who was the national treasurer of National Education Union of South Africa. And he was banned himself. He couldn't teach. So that's how we end up teaching in a Catholic school, because we couldn't teach anywhere else. And of course, it was a difficult time of being activists. We were both underground activists. We had been student leaders, and we were teacher activists, and we were youth activists in Soweto. So that's the kind of experience we had. But it was a difficult thing. I know that these days every black person says they were fighting apartheid.
Yeah.
There were very, very few activists. Very, very few activists. What you see today with people accepting power is old. Activists have always been few. Very, very. I see people on TV these days who says they were fighting apartheid when I know they were not. They were actually supporting it. Black people. But it's difficult to trace that. And we do this. I write these things to show those who are seen as lone rangers that society has always been changed, moved by lone rangers. Galileo said the earth evolves around the sun and was punished for it. The Pope hated him. We know now he was right. And so being a non-conformist has always moved society a step ahead. It's difficult, it's a lonely road, but it works.
There's so many episodes we could touch on,
Yeah.
and I would just encourage people to buy the book, because we're literally just scratching the surface of the different moments. Chris Hani had an influence on you deciding to study law. Talk us through that, because I found that a fascinating moment.
I think it was a very, the early 90s were a very, very difficult time. And there was a feeling of euphoria about what's coming and what's not coming. And I was in this MK unit that reported to him. I didn't know him. He knew of me, but he was out of the country and we were here. And of course, I think having met him when he came back, because I was much more an activist in the SACP, largely. And so he was still living in Soweto at the time, Orlando East, before he moved to the Israel. And so I developed a very close relationship with him.
Wow.
I think he realized that I was one of the people who were very critical of the political settlement. I just really was never convinced about the negotiations. I'm still not convinced. Today, I'm not convinced that I was not convinced that they would yield to liberation. Many people thought they would. And in my discussions with him, I think I found someone who, as much as he accepted what the ANC was doing, but he was as critical as I was about it. And so we got to know each other. And in that space, after our arrest, because he paid for our bail and all of this, after that, he had a discussion with me about, are you going to be a teacher forever? And of course, all of us were waiting for the new government, we would participate. And he said, the ANC may not always be what you know. And what you know as your comrades may not always be your comrades.
Sure.
And it's better if you are independent. I suppose he had seen many liberation attempts. And he said, go back to school, and you will be independent. So you don't depend on power holders for your life. It was great advice because at the moment, a lot of people accuse me of being in the AFF or MK or whatever, but I'm not a member of any political party at the moment because I want my views to be tested for what they are rather than to advance a political party. A lot of people will be shocked by this because they believe I'm in some political parties. I'm not. Because I prefer a revolution that has nothing to do with party political narrow agendas. I think South Africa needs honest views at the moment in order to collapse this system.
I'm sure they've all approached you as well, so it's not as if you're not choosing. It's a question of actually actively keeping that independence at the moment.
I've been approached, not once, many times, and I keep good relationships with those comrades in the party because I know them, I trust them, they're my friends. But I have particular views about a revolution rather than narrow party political agendas. I think we need something bigger as a revolution at the moment than the advancement of what I call narrow electoralism, waiting for 5 years, another party comes in. I think South Africans who have no food today can't wait 5 years. And I think the people who can wait 5 years and be patient about this are people who are not at the receiving end of the pain of poverty and dispossession, landlessness, and hunger.
The part of the book that I selfishly loved the most was the section where you spoke about your experiences in law as someone who's been studying the law.
Sure.
I'm telling you, every lawyer needs to, and every aspiring lawyer needs to read this book because there are law textbooks, but there are very few memoirs which delve into especially advocacy at the highest level in South Africa right now.
Yeah.
And especially when you're a senior black advocate because your experiences are different. And to go behind the scenes like you do was just an education. I think it should actually be prescribed.
It was a risk I took.
I'm sure.
Because as you will see, there will be all sorts of advocates and judges who say, you can't speak about a matter, you can't criticize the judiciary. Sizo, there's no point in speaking if you're saying what others have said.
Absolutely.
There's no point in writing a book if you don't demonstrate in it that you're speaking honestly, authentically. Not that your views are correct, are the only ones correct, but that's me. And of course, when people get surprised about things I'm saying, that why am I saying them? It's because no one knows what goes on when you're representing people.
Absolutely.
And no one knows that your role at our level sometimes ceases to be that of a legal advisor. Because you're dealing with high stakes cases of highly traumatized people. In you, they need a lawyer, but they also need a strategic thinker. Sometimes someone to counsel them because they are facing injustice. They may be wrong, but they are facing injustice.
Sure.
And so you need to rise above narrow lawyering to be at that level. You don't necessarily agree.
Yeah.
And I want to teach young lawyers here. I was taught this when I came to the bar, but I realized they were pretending. That as advocates, we are available to everyone who needs justice. I was to learn that it's actually a lie. People don't mean it.
Wow.
Because in the end, they want you to choose the so-called good side, the side that they like, represent people that they like. They actually are not telling the truth. And I'm trying to turn lawyers, young lawyers, not to be cowards. You can't represent people if you're a coward. You can't represent someone if you keep an eye on pleasing those who are causing injustice to someone you are representing. It's going to fool. There are no half measures in a battle for someone facing injustice. And so I'm trying to go behind the scenes. I mean, I even talk about these big cases, you watch analysts speak about things they don't know. I watched people go to have tea with Zuma because we had given him bad advice. For God's sake, 5 of us. They think we couldn't tell someone that defying a court order is contemptuous. Of course you do. But it's the arrogance of lawyers. They think clients are wheelbarrows into which you pour your advice and nothing else. No, you've got to respect principles of your clients as long as they are not unlawful.
Yeah.
You've got to accept that your job is to help them. They are not stupid. Most of my clients are cleverer than me. And I've got to accept that. And so a lot of people in these cases become experts when they don't know what goes on behind the scenes. And no one comes to an advocate unless they are facing some difficulty and adversity.
You speak about the Zuma matter, which you deal with deftly in the book, I think. And you speak about the Zondo Commission, which is in some ways where a lot of public scrutiny was trained on both you and President Zuma. And there was this false accusation that you had walked out of the commission.
Yeah.
And I once again, I must encourage people to read this because it takes us into a period which was framed in one way throughout the mainstream media.
Yeah.
But you give us a completely different perspective from your view. Talk us through that, because I found that particularly enlightening, and what you were going through at the time and how it was mischaracterized.
I mean, the media had mischaracterized a lot of things about me in the SARS matter. I think I talk about it, where I write 100-and-something page report, and they've always talked about one lie. One line. And they know it's a lie, but they repeated it for 10 years, right? And the Zuma matter for me was interesting. You know, Sizwe, no one has ever been asked, no one in this country, no lawyer, to tell a deputy chief justice that you're close to recuse himself. It's not a simple matter, right? It's not as simple. And there's a judge who told me they think I was grandstanding. There's no grandstanding. It's not a nice experience to walk into a place, tell a man you know that you're proud of, because I'm proud of Zondo, say, bro, you're wrong here. And so in a way, you know, the Zondo Commission for me was probably, and not Zondo, I'm talking about the system, that entire commission was probably the biggest, most shameful scam, political scam, that I think lawyers and judges must be ashamed of.
Wow.
That something that was supposed to delve into the truth about how states are captured was turned into a sham of scapegoating. Right? And all the lies about it. You know, let's take the walkout. I mean, no judge can allow counsel to walk out. And this is said by people who heard me say, I will excuse myself because I had waited for 2 days to go to Durban, and I kept waiting because the judge was not giving his ruling. And so I could never walk out. Most people know me. I'm not a very violent, rude person. I would never do that to any judge. But it was played. It's played. It's a break, tea time, and journalists play this walkout. And it's people walking out for tea. It was tea time. But no journalist has corrected it. And I don't think they don't know that there was no walkout. They know. But the entire Zondo Commission for me was a series, layers of narratives that were not designed to dig out the dirt about the country, in the belly of the country, but to scapegoat one side and present others as innocent. I don't think states are made up that way, of angels and devils. I think it's much more complex than that. And I think I was disappointed that the country spent $1 billion deceiving itself.
Reading the book, you also realize that that moment was a national moment, but
Yeah.
it was also a family moment in some ways, or
Yeah.
at least a moment where different lines that were close together came together, because you had the Nxamalala line, which is in some ways linked to you, and of course
Yes.
President Zuma.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize was that former Chief Justice Zondo himself was proximate to you. And so there was almost a deeper level of what was happening between, shall we say, extended, very vastly extended familial ties in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what made it difficult. Even for Judge Zondo and Zuma, you don't condemn Judge Zondo. It was a difficult moment for him.
Sure.
Judge Zondo has never been my enemy. I don't know now. But even if he's my enemy now, it's caused by external forces that may have lied to him. He's a very affable, friendly, polite man. And Zuma is the same. And I think I'm the same. I'm not rude to anybody. But unfortunately, litigation forced us to be in that moment of people who have tension, and I'm trying to mediate between them. Yeah. And there's so much that people don't know that causes tension between the two men. And I'm in the middle of it.
Sure.
And I'm representing one that I must represent with all my abilities. And I am presenting to someone I like. But I've got to represent my client. And I do think he was wrong. And it's my job. It's my job to state what I must state. And so people don't appreciate the difficulty of having to manage that difficult moment in front of televisions and 65 million experts watching. And they think it's easy. You give me one advocate in this country, one lawyer who's been had the task to tell a deputy chief justice that you must recuse yourself.
While representing a former president.
While representing a former president who is despised by the powerful. As this guilty person who's not liked. You are in the middle of it. Not because you like or dislike any of them, but you're in the middle of it. So I explain it in the book because people don't know high stakes litigation.
Absolutely.
Right. And so in a way, it was a difficult moment and it has cost friendships, in a way. For spectators, it looks like a spectacle to analyze. But for those involved, it's a very difficult moment. It was never easy for Zondo either.
Yeah, sure.
It was not easy. I don't take it lightly. It was not easy for Zuma. It was not easy for me because I'm presenting it. So it was throughout. It's very difficult to represent a client who's despised, who's also such an enigma. Zuma causes irrationality to those who love him and those who hate him. They become irrational, all of them. Those who love him think he can do no wrong. Those who hate him think he is guilty of all the ills in the country. He's a scapegoat for many and a hero for others, sometimes just because they love him. And it's a difficult client to have.
Fam, before we get back to the episode, we just want to let you know we have a big goal on this channel to build this community to 1,000 members. That means we have 2 new levels of SMWX membership. The first level gives you exclusive access to content, discounts on merch, but the second level, in addition to various other perks, gives you access to me. We're going to have meetups, online sessions. You're going to get discount on our live events. So if you want to deepen your SMWX community experience, help us get to that 1,000 member level. Look forward to seeing you there. And when you're associated with President Zuma, whether his lawyer or some other association, that irrationality then turns onto you.
Yeah, but it's also mixed with race. It didn't happen to the white lawyers who represent him, so it turns in race because when you are an African lawyer, there's a general, even by black people, there's a general acceptance that because you are black, you are not independent, you're not professional.
You're pursuing some political agenda.
While white lawyers do this, white lawyers now represent 3 people who are accused of feeding 2 black women to the pigs. Ask any South African if they know their names. They don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But because it's fine, it's not too difficult. It's not a big case for someone to feed black women to the pigs. And to represent those, it's fine. But to represent Zuma is a bigger crime than representing a priest who's raped teenagers and a white farmer who's fed 2 women to the pigs. A lot of my colleagues represented a lot of white crooks, tax dodgers in the 90s and the 2000s. We don't even know their names. So I don't think it's just that it's difficult to be an advocate. It's difficult to be a black advocate in high stakes litigation.
That is so true because Advocate Jeremy Gauntlet, brilliant advocate, he represented Zuma in the Nkandla matter, and they basically came before court and
you know why? Because he is white and is cleverer, more independent, is professional. He can't be like Dali or Muzi Sikhakhane. He's superior, so don't judge him. But that's the logic, that's the philosophy that I want young lawyers to get out of their system. The desire to seek white validation and validation at the expense of truth. And to please powerful forces at the expense of their clients.
Kemp, I mean, I can't remember the number of times he went to court, but he was never associated in the same way with Zuma.
Not in that way, but I spoke to Kemp.
Really?
Yeah, before. I think I do raise it a bit. And he was tired. He was fatigued.
Sure.
He didn't even go through what I was going through. But he was fatigued.
Wow.
Because as a lawyer, there's nothing as exciting as preparing a legal point for a big matter. But when you've reached a point where it doesn't matter, I can prepare for 4 solid days, and I think I'm right on this point. But the system is such that those who are adjudicating may not want to be seen to be agreeing with who I represent. It kills your spirit. And I think when I met him, he didn't retire because he was old or anything or sick, no. He was a great man, a very, very affable, humble guy. But he had been fatigued.
Wow.
Because it didn't really matter how thorough you are. When you are representing Zuma, you're starting from 10-0. As you stand up, it's 10-0. And your opponent is 10 up on you because he represents the good side. And so it's a difficult thing, and it's worse when you're black because there are all sorts of assumptions about you. I mean, take the issue that Zuma lawyers should not be paid by the state. When did that happen? When his lawyer became black.
Sure.
Kemp had been milking it. Even black people started making noise about the legal costs when lawyers became black.
Absolutely.
I don't think they are conscious about this. Even our politicians are not conscious.
Fees even get thrown out into the public space.
So it's that I'm trying to write about that experience. And I'm not saying it's the only correct experience or the facts or things I talk about. But it's important for people to know the system and how it kills you. You're going to be a lawyer soon, and you will see that it will disappoint you to see that in order to make money, a lot of black people who are smart live their lives complying, conforming, insulting themselves and those who are like them in order to survive, in order to go to a coffee shop and be liked by their white colleagues because they need to survive. So they live at their own expense, hiding how they feel. And so I'm trying to write so that the younger lawyers like yourself maybe can push the frontiers a bit by trusting themselves and believing that they don't have to please anyone to live, to survive.
The Zuma contempt moment is when you, after that, transitioned out of the legal representation of former President Zuma, if I'm not incorrect, and you give us some insight into that moment as well. talk us through that, because again, this is a key moment in our political history where a former president effectively says, I'm not going to appear.
Yeah.
And people then think that is you saying to the former president, well, the best thing you can do now legally is say you're not going to appear before the court.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's not blame him only. First of all, those who went to drink tea with him, who thought they were smarter than me, they were going to give him advice we hadn't give him. They haven't told us what he said to them. He phoned me every time they went to him. He says, hey, Muzi, they're here outside. They think they can persuade me.
Yeah.
You know why? All of them thought they were so superior. They knew something that we had not told him. We told President Zuma everything. All scenarios, like you would with a client. But you've got to respect your client. Clients can only do what they are emotionally and mentally ready to do. Don't force them to do things that you prefer, unless they want to do something inappropriate. When someone says it no longer matters to go to court, I'm accumulating costs for no reason, no one's listening. That idea from him resonated with me. I was tired of going to court to be abused when it means nothing. Someone said in the judgment, you will read, they say Zuma did not come to present his side. Detention without trial is a Section 35 issue of the Constitution. You don't need a lawyer to persuade you to comply with the Constitution as a court. Yeah. So what's going to happen next time? We're going to sentence someone to death and say, well, his lawyers did not come. You can't do what is unconstitutional and say, well, he should have come to present what's constitutional. Not when something so clear. So, yes, he didn't want to go. Yeah. And it's a sad thing because he respects the law, but he had given up. And as lawyers, we would persuade him, but we had to understand that we too were fatigued. We had reached a point I see now where you go to court, you respect the judges, but you can see they've started competing about who can put you to your place. And it's not a nice feeling. So it reached a point where even for us as lawyers, for me in particular, speak for myself, I was tired of going to a place where it doesn't matter how rigorous I can be.
Yeah,
I'm subjecting myself to abuse that actually will achieve nothing. And I'm trying to say these stories not to insult or scandalize the courts. I want the judges to reflect, to rethink, to look at their demeanor and things they say in politically contentious matters. And that's my aim. I'm not scandalizing them. Even where I say there's no integrity, I'm trying to be as brutal as I can so that they can... I'm saying things people say about them in the privacy of their homes. And I'm trying to bring it out as impolitely as I can so that it can shock their system and they can sit. And most judges are very close to me, and they're men and women of great, great intentions. But the system itself, they have not looked at their relationship with elite interests. And I'm trying to ask them to reflect. I hope they heed the call. They don't see this as an attack on them. But I'm saying things that I feel, that I see, that I think will corrode trust in the judiciary.
It's crucial, and I don't think there's any line or word that you say in the book that is unfair. And if we get to a point where in a free society you can't have a considered criticism of the judiciary, then we're really limiting such a key source of public power. I mean, the judiciary exercises huge power. And quite frankly, politicians get criticized all the time, and people say all kinds of things about them.
Even the judges themselves say all sorts of things about politicians.
They even say things about their lawyers. But
the lawyers.
Let me not.
No. I'll venture into that. I mean, the example of what Judge Ponen does to Mpofu is something we should be outraged about. When you're going to attack a practitioner, you've got to give them an opportunity if you think they're unethical. I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm saying a judge should know. But it's what I'm telling you about. We've reached a point where our judges have become so childish that it's become a competition as to who can put Muzi or Dali to his place. It's such a childish attitude to a job that I think is one of the most important jobs in the world. To adjudicate human disputes, right? So where I say those things, I say them because I think it's, if our judges don't look at themselves and if our politicians don't look at themselves, this so-called democracy is going to unravel. People will lose faith.
Very true.
And one day there will be some kind of Arab Spring revolution that people will say it came out of the blue. And then judges also, people cite to me State versus Mama Bolo, this or that case of how judges must be criticized. It's absolute rubbish for a holder of power to say, please, you can criticize me, but let me tell you how you must criticize me.
I must be treated in some special way.
Yeah, it's like white power. People say, every time you discuss racism with white people, they say, oh, don't hurt me. They place white feelings at the center. It's like males about gender issues. Every time you talk about women oppression, males become defensive and they put male feelings at the center. Judges do the same. They want to frame for you. So Mamvemve in Kwamashu, who's unhappy with judges, must write a research paper to criticize a holder of public power called the judge. It's actually the most arrogant thing I've ever seen for a holder of public power to say, oh, yes, you can criticize me, but here is a framework. I want them to reflect about that holders of public power must know that they are like a tall tree. The wind will blow, and they must resist the wind.
And other democracies have had these conversations. I was reading something interesting where in India there has been an interesting conversation about, look, if certain counsel representing certain litigants come to court, their Supreme Court, you can predict the outcome. And that's a dangerous thing from a rule of law perspective. You never want to get the sense that if certain counsel representing certain clients go to a specific court, they're going to have an easy time, or the court is going to be very reluctant to find against them. And we need to guard against that. Whether it's true or whether there's a perception that is the case, that is a rule of law issue.
When I talk about the fact that young lawyers must free themselves of their fear of white power. They are going to be judges one day. What does a judge who fears white power do when faced with a white counsel and black counsel? Who do you think he wants to risk differing with? And it's not necessarily as overt as you think, but you see, people who fear one race or who believe the one race is inferior or they are inferior don't want to differ with the race that they think is superior. It's an unconscious thing that lives in their subconscious mind, all of us. And so I'm asking young people to free themselves now of fears we have, of fearing white power and treating white people as some kind of superior. Because if we don't deal with that, we won't have genuine non-racialism. And so race matters even in courts like it does in every facet of society. And of course, when a guy was a compliant lawyer who feared white power is now a judge, what do you think he does when Wim Trengov is arguing and Muzi Sikhakhane is arguing? Who do you think he'll take the risk of differing with? Naturally, it's me, because he's not scared of me. I don't represent superior power to his inner being, right? And so we need to read society. And I think my generation and those who are older are a lost cause. I'm writing to put these things out for your age and people after you, because I think there's hope for them. to break free of those psychological ties to slavery, to slave mentalities, and to believing that they are inferior. And that is why I put those things out. I don't put them out because I'm perfect. I put them out because I think they must be out there as a debate.
What also becomes clear when you speak about all the different clients you've represented is that you can't draw a simple political narrative, because you've represented people on so many different sides, let alone the clients people don't know you've represented and the cases they don't see. You've represented Julius Malema. You've represented... You acted in a case on the other side of Judge Hlophe.
I did.
You have represented SARS. You've represented so many different interests at different times that there's just no way anyone could draw a line other than that clients approach you through their attorneys and you take up their causes and represent their legal interests. And that's what counsel's supposed to do.
Some of my attackers are people I've represented.
Wow.
That's the funniest experience I've had. I won't tell you the name. I know a minister who's okay now, who couldn't speak to me. We met I represented him in the most dangerous brief.
Wow.
But because he had a fallout with Zuma, now that I'm representing Zuma, he actually thinks it's wrong. It's a natural instinct. A lot of people would call me that I represented.
Wow.
Why are you representing this guy? And so in a way, it's what I call the dishonesty that's so pervasive in society. I call it in the book that South Africa's first language is double standard.
So true.
It's our first
We must put that on a billboard.
I'm telling you, it's a chapter. I call it double standard, South Africa's first language.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And the judiciary, the legal profession are at the top of those who've mastered the double standard themselves. And it shouldn't be like that. The politicians, we know, double standard is their only language. But generally, you would hope that those who are outside that. But you see, the problem is this division of law and politics. There is no such division. Even those who tell us that this is rule of law, it's not politics. That's a scheme itself. It's a political scam to make you do certain things. When people say the appointment of judges is not political, I prefer the American system, where we know judges are Democrats and are Republicans, because here they are too. It's just that here we like pretending that people have no views, no political persuasions. It's a whole lot of rubbish. We need to be more honest, because when we are more honest, we are able to make each other accountable. This whole idea that there's something that's not political, even by these NGOs who go around saying this or that. Take the Minister of Justice, who's just been fired now. Have you heard anyone complain that she's now in human settlement? No. Suddenly the VBS issue is no longer an issue. You know why? He's not in a ministry that white power regards as central. It was not corruption they had a problem with. Because treasury and justice and all of those kinds of ministries are centers of power. They don't care if you are a minister of human settlements. It's black people who want a shack or a house. They don't care about those. You could be called corrupt, they won't mind. But don't be in ministries or institutions that they want to control. Because they want to control who gets prosecuted. They want to control who's called a criminal and who's not, who's corrupt. And usually those people who want to control society like that are the most corrupt in society. But unfortunately, they control the media, they control the means of propaganda, and they control the minds and what minds consume. And they repeat certain things until they become reality. But usually, the people who are involved in propaganda are usually people who want to hide something. And for me, that is what we need to be aware about the law, about the judiciary, about politics in general. There is no distinction. There's a reason, Sizwe, you live in an apartment where you live. There's a reason. You're a white guy who's your age. There's a reason he lives where he lives. There's a reason a white secretary of advocate has a house and the black secretary of an advocate lives at home. It's a historical issue. And so we need to tell these truths so that we can get them out and then deal with them. I know that by speaking the things I say here, I'm going to suffer. But it takes that kind of non-conformity to bring things out in the open. And it doesn't matter that it offends people. It doesn't matter what they do, but the subject matter is out. You know, I do wish that people come for me because you're going to see people I've been telling you about. You're going to see white NGOs. You're going to see the establishment advocates come for me. You're going to see the judges. The people who are not worried about what I say are those who are not guilty of what I'm saying. You hear a judge who's worried about what I'm saying, well, that's the type of judge I'm condemning because they know I'm talking about them. But the people who know that they are honorable are not worried about the things I'm saying because they know I'm not talking about them. It's like saying dogs bite. A dog that doesn't bite won't worry. The one that worries is the one that bites. And so the people I'm going to face are the enemies that have been attacking me from the shadows. And I want society to know them. And I also want to know them because some of them have been pretending to be my friends for years, to the extent that I don't touch white power. But well, I do. And so this book for me reveals who's my friend, who's my real one, and who's the friend of my people.
One last question on the representation. You've represented Arthur Fraser, who blew the lid off the Phala Phala scandal. And again, I'm sure, well, in some ways you delve into it, but again, representing a client like that who has created such historical news, but also in such a political way, puts certain pressures on you as well, and maybe subjects you to certain threats that people don't even fully know about. Obviously, I mean, you don't have to divulge everything you've been through, but that's the other thing people don't know. That they don't know that when you represent these clients, often you do so at the cost of your own well-being sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, look, clients are not angels. That's the first thing. Let's get that out of the way. We wouldn't represent them if they were not facing adversity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the senior you are in the legal profession, the more exposed you become to clients who have bigger enemies. There's no two ways about it.
Sure.
And of course, people say, as a lawyer, you can't you need to keep a distance from clients and all of this. It's even that itself is a lie. I don't speak about Arthur Fraser because I think he would be found innocent or guilty. But I don't understand why people talk about someone and in a truth-finding session called the commission, every excuse not to call him is made. Even, no, but he didn't apply. I represented Zuma. He didn't apply to the commission, but he was called. Who called Fakey Mento? Who called all the people? The commission just called them. Now, here is this person talked about by no less than 5 people. We don't want to hear him. That's my gripe. Not that he's innocent or anything. I don't know. My gripe is, why don't call this person? And I conclude, knowing his version of things, that someone does not want to know his version. Someone is not comfortable with his thesis. I call it his thesis because, you see, had I chaired a commission like that, I would have called those professors they called who were talking about state capture as the first 2 witnesses from America. It's fine, you call them. But call someone who contradicts this thesis. And then evaluate intellectually whether this notion is correct. But it wasn't happening. And I've gone through a lot just representing him, the dangers he goes through. But with clients that I represent, you've got to go fully behind them to fight their battle, right? I'm not just someone trying to get them through something. At some point, on a daily basis, they are facing persecution. People don't know the lives they live at home, right? And so you've got, at my level, on any senior counsel, you've got to understand that clients at that level who face persecution require more from you than lawyering. And because I know persecution, I understand the mind of a person who feels persecuted. It's not a mind of an innocent person. That's irrelevant. I understand what it feels like to be persecuted and what you need around you. And so I try to provide that to my clients. Yeah. First, I don't judge them. And secondly, I try to provide them with comfort and legal advice, but without hiding the truth from them. So with Arthur, I just feel that he was never, the country missed out to hear his thesis of the deep state that is in control in this country. We don't want to know. We had an opportunity to know who controls our politicians, maybe. Which powers behind the scenes, which things are happening. Who came up with this concept called state capture? Who were the pawns in it and who were the puppet masters? And was it ever designed to find the truth about the dangers of capturing the state, or it was to deepen capturing the state by those who presented themselves as corruption fighters? I believe, my thesis is that the states are always captured. And those who have captured South African state decided first to call others capturers so that they could deepen and strengthen their own capture of the state. And we who are lawyers and judges should have seen through that instead of assisting one side that wants to be clothed with innocence. We start from basis that everyone is capable of doing wrong. But we didn't start that way. We called angels to the commission first to give their versions, the innocent, the good people. There's no such thing. In fact, I think a series of people who appeared before that commission across the board are themselves have something to explain about their role in counter-revolution. And I'm not saying one side. Across the board, each one of the political players, if they are honest, including my clients, everybody, they have something to explain to society about their role in the past 30 years.
What I couldn't understand and what lost me some confidence in the commission, and why I think I agree with you. I think the narrative of state capture has just lost any meaning at this point.
We wasted R1 billion for nothing.
Yeah.
For a sham.
Yeah. Was that I could never understand how certain people who were right there were framed as the resistors of this process, and others who were in the same room were the proponents of state capture. And either we're going to criticize everyone who was there,
sure,
or we're going to exonerate everyone. But we can't say that, yes, that person was there at the highest levels, but shame, they tried, but they couldn't do anything about it. I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think, as I say, the South Africa's first language is double standard. Yeah. People know what we are saying, but I think honesty is a very difficult thing, and in politics it's worse. And people are looking for confirmation bias. And even in bigger fora like state capture commissions and other commissions of inquiry, instead of wanting to find the truth, people want to find what's convenient to a narrative they already hold. And for me, that was the saddest thing about this, was I would have liked a commission of inquiry for the first time that would analyze what is in the belly of this society, who's pulling the strings. But unfortunately, I think even the commission was a component of the deep state, pulling the strings and pulling wool over our eyes. And that was the saddest thing for me, because it was a lost opportunity for ones to hold Pravin Gordhan, Jacob Zuma, Cyril Ramaphosa, everybody to account for their role in what I think is a revolution betrayed. Everybody had to account. This idea of calling angels and then the others are already found guilty before they appear was a wrong approach to a truth-finding endeavor.
Well, that takes us on to the last section of the book, where you speak about the country as a whole and your disappointment at the betrayal that we found. And as I said at the launch, we're used to reading liberation narratives that end in 94 and then everyone lives happily ever after. But this is interesting because you're writing at a time when there are many people questioning how deep this liberation really was. And you're adding your voice and lending your voice to the view that a lot of what we have won is hollow, and the liberation movement in its best sense has not begun to achieve its aims. Talk us through where you see the country at the moment.
Yeah, when you say this, a lot of people, the people who were involved in negotiations, and they don't want you to criticize them or Mandela. They think you're attacking them. I think society only advances if we are able to analyze shortcomings and advantages of political interventions. And yes, I've never been a fan of a negotiated settlement, at least in the way it happened, because I thought it was controlled by those global forces and domestic forces that held power. And the reason we know, all of us, that economic power was not transferred, it's because the entire negotiation process for me was an initiative of those who already held power, capitalizing on battle fatigue by our leaders and changing global environments where, yes, liberation movements were battling at the time. And I'm not saying it was selling out, but it was a difficult time for those who were leading revolutions. And they were beaten to submission, others deliberately complying with capital, and others realizing there's no other option. But it was an imperfect political settlement, nevertheless. In fact, not imperfect. I think it was hollow. If you want to liberate people who've been oppressed, you've got to undo their daily experiences. Mentally, socially, psychologically, spatially, physically, economically. You've got educationally, you've got to undo all of that. And it's not difficult. This idea that it's gradual is itself a theme of those who like maintaining the status quo. We missed an opportunity. And the past 30 years for me have been evidence of my pessimism, that this was nothing else but a trick to prolong neoliberalism and a trick to maintain white power by giving people the vote and give them houses there and there, but don't give them economic power. Don't give them economic power. And if you don't give them economic power, you subject them to your control all the time. The South African situation, you've taken your kids to the mall. If you want to imagine South Africa, imagine children playing with a chart in a shop while parents are shopping. They give you different colors. We are like those children. We have different colors, crayons for coloring the chart, but the frame remains the same. It's controlled. You must destroy the frame if to get liberation. Otherwise, you just recoloring. changing orange and replacing with purple. That's what we've been doing for the past 30 years. And we don't want to admit that something went wrong. And that's why in the book, I'm not condemning one person or party. Yeah. I think we must go back to the drawing boards. Not to this, I don't even believe this, what's this dialogue being called? It's exactly like the Zondo Commission. It's one of those things where holders of power say, let's get ahead. Let's call something so that it looks like. I think we must have a CODESA, complete discussion about how we've moved forward and how we've regressed. And start all over. Otherwise, generations and generations of Africans are going to live the way they do for the next 200 years.
Well, Advocate Sikhakhane, thank you for joining us on SMWX. Thank you for writing this book. I think it's a profound act of bravery and courage, which comes through in your life story, but is also symbolized by the book itself. So we really appreciate you taking the time to share your views publicly.
Yep. For
one of the first times on SMWX. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for reading my book.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And make sure that you go out and get this book, Odyssey of Liberation, a memoir of a rebel advocate, available at all good bookstores. And you know what we're going to do? Down in the comments below, for the first person who comments the name and title of this book, we're going to give one copy away of this book to you. So thank you very much. What we're also going to do is to a member who becomes a member of SMWX and sends an email to info@smw-x.co.za. We'll also give this book away to you for free. Bob, this is an important work. All the best with it and how it goes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Aye.